Save the Semantics, episode 344. It is September 27th, 2025. My name is Myro. This is the podcast where I ramble on for a bit about some shit. Recording this on a Saturday evening. It's gotten cooler, that is for sure. Forecast was pretty good in that regard. It's we got some clouds overhead. It's kind of sprinkling a little bit earlier today, so good news for fall weather lovers, including myself. Hopefully we're past a lot of those little heat waves that we had over the last couple of weeks. Hopefully we're past that point. It's nice to kind of be in cooler weather again. I like wearing sweaters. I mean, in terms of like fashion and stuff like that, I've been rocking like my t-shirt look for a minute now. I think it would be good to spruce things up, so change in weather definitely helps with that. It's been a decent weekend, I would say. At least a decent start to the weekend. I caught up a bit last night on some Witcher 3. It feels like I'm I'm close to the end of the DLC campaign for Blood and Wine. So I'll talk about that in a bit. And I also played some more Trails this week. Just a little bit, not like a lot. Maybe just like an hour or so. So not like a ton, but I expect that I'll get into that game fully as once I wrap up Witcher 3. But it's been nice to kind of interchange those two games, just change the pace, change the vibe and the aesthetics. Is kind of nice, you know what I mean? Not just sticking with one style. Just kind of switching it up is nice. But I do think that I'll jump into Trails, fully dive into it once I wrap up The Witcher. But there is like a part of me now that I am I've done quite a lot of stuff in the Blood and Wine DLC. I would say I actually prioritize doing quite a bit of the side content, because I was having fun with it, and kind of in line with what I was talking about, either earlier this week or last week, just talking about the fact that there is not going to be a new Witcher game, a new Witcher experience for quite some time. So I feel the need to maybe indulge a bit, maybe really take it in and soak it all in before I finish this game. Because I think, once I finish Blood and Wine, I don't think I'll be coming back to this game. You know what I mean? It's like maybe down the line, far into the future, I'll replay this. But yeah, I mean, once I feel I've gotten my fill and I've done most of the main items that this game presents, I'm gonna move on to the next thing. So I want to take it in as much as I can, because I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Like, it's hard to say whether this is gonna end up being one of my favorite games, but it's grown. It's grown quite a bit, like on my list. It's definitely gotten up there. A lot of the praise that this game and a lot of the accolades this game has received is absolutely warranted. I think going into this game, not necessarily knowing the full extent of the story, like, of course, I am familiar with I'm familiar with the franchise because I watched the Netflix series, or I watched part of the next Netflix series. It's been, sort of a popular media now for quite some time, so I am familiar with it. It's more so like just engaging with with a big part of the franchise, which is The Witcher 3. I think that's kind of like, you could probably argue that it is like the most substantial entry in like the Witcher franchise, right? Like that's like what kind of brought the franchise to popularity and everything like that. Outside of the source material in the books, like that was kind of like the game that imploded into the mainstream, I believe. So yeah, I mean it's just yeah, I mean and just like I've noted some criticisms regarding maybe some of the pacing in the main story, and some other elements. Maybe the gameplay is not exactly the most intuitive or the most exciting, but regardless of that, it's still an incredible game, right? You could poke holes at it. There's plenty to criticize, but I think as an overall product, as an overall experience, it is really well made. It is incredibly well made. And it just makes me excited to delve into other parts of the franchise. Like I mentioned before, I'm listening to the audiobooks now little by little. I would like to, I'm excited to play The Witcher 4 whenever that comes out, but I'm not in any rush to do so. But I do want to, I really do want to enjoy the last portion of this game. And because it's just it's getting close, and I'm like kind of holding on, and it's like I know it's gonna eventually have to come to an end. That's like a good feeling to have, especially when you're considering what you might consider as like one of your favorite games or whatever, one of your favorite shows or whatever. It's where you don't want it to come to an end. And I think that's like a good, it's like bittersweet, but I do think it's a good feeling, and it's a good indication that this is something special. So I'll have to kind of, I haven't, I don't think I've ever done like a top 10 list of my favorite games or something like that. That is something that I have considered, and I have started to maybe write out a list of those games. I have like a good sense of it, but in terms of like ordering it, that's a little harder, you know what I mean? But it's a fun exercise. And then looking at this game in comparison to other games, it stacks up pretty damn well. So if I ever do get around to talking about that, and I feel like as I continue to play more games, there might be new games that come up on there. So if I put out a list, I'm a little worried that I would have to kind of relist it basically, right? And then put out another one. But who knows? That might just be the exercise, is the fact that it is just like a changing, evolving list. That's not going to remain static as I continue to delve into other games and other franchises and that kind of thing, because there are so many. There's so many out there that I have yet to experience and get into. So that might completely just shift my perception of what I have considered my favorite games. It's just something that I think it's going to continue to build, and I'm going to have to continue to sort of consider like what is actually my favorite games. And do I look at it from the lens of nostalgia? Because a lot of my favorite games are my favorite games during my childhood and all those kinds of things. So that's just something worth looking over. But I do want to try. I do want to do something like that, because I think that might be fun. Yeah. So it's been a fun. It's been a great experience with Blood and Wine. The story, I think, I really don't want to do the comparison thing. So I'll try to go with, just looking at it as a whole. The story did open up a little bit more. Like there was the mystery was kind of unraveling a little bit more as I sort of progressed. It's good. I think the element of intrigue, sort of like the idea behind the mystery, like trying to figure out what it is, the reasons behind like a certain character's action and that kind of thing is somewhat compelling. I don't know if it's like the strongest hook for me personally. It's and I think you know the way in which this story has connected so far has been, I would say, has been good, but also there are moments where you're kind of like, I don't know exactly why this character did that. It feels a little, I don't know, it maybe feels a little plot holy, but that might just be like more nitpicking on my end. It doesn't affect like the overall quality of the story in any ways, in any way, shape, or form. I think there's a lot that you can take away in terms of the imagery and the symbolism that certain parts of the story display. And I'm sure a lot of that is going to tie into like a greater theme towards the end of this campaign. So I'm excited to see kind of how that wraps up. I might even, depending on timing and how much time I'm able to commit, I might even see through to the end of this game by this weekend. But we'll see how that goes, and then I'll kind of give my thoughts on the ending without spoiling anything. But I think as a adventure, it's it's fun. I think the I think there are some issues that you could kind of point out, and that just might be the fact that it's just my gameplay style in terms of where so much of the emphasis I think is placed on side content as opposed to kind of the main story, where you could sort of unintentionally or even intentionally mess up the mess up like the flow or the pacing of the story. But that just might be your own personal like gaming preferences, you know what I mean? I think in the case of and this is something that I've noticed now after playing both the main campaign of The Witcher 3, but also Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, these these sort of more open world games where there is so much expansive content and material that you can engage with. It often takes away from the focus of what might be a lot more of a streamlined, compelling narrative story. And I think that just might be a an issue, or that just might be the product of having an open world game, is the fact that your player might embark and do other things outside of the main story, which kind of takes their focus away from the narrative and takes the focus away from the potential character development of the characters involved in the main story and that kind of thing. So I I think that it can be sort of difficult to try to balance those things. I think a reason why Heart of Stone, in my opinion, worked so well was because there wasn't a lot of extra fluff in the other, content outside of that main story. Like all of the quests and all of the storylines worked very well to eventually lead to the conclusion of the story. Like they were all building upon each other. It felt like there was not a there wasn't like a sense of like it didn't feel like fluff, you know what I mean? And I think in the case of Blood and Wine, it kind of falls back to the same thing with the main, the base game, where there is so much additional content, like so much more that can kind of, quote unquote, distract you from the main story, that it might take away from the pacing of the story, or maybe some of the more emotional moments of the story aren't quite hitting because it doesn't feel like you've invested enough time into these characters because you were doing something else on the side, right? Like you have to go back into, I mean, this is like a good, sort of quality of life addition, is including, character logs and character backstories and that kind of thing. Because sometimes I have to go back and be like, I don't actually remember who this character was and what their importance was to the story. So I think that is good that they included that. But it's just kind of like, I really do think that, sometimes when it comes to these larger games, the unfortunate byproduct is the fact that some of the main story might be a little diluted because there is so much additional content presented, right? If you have a game which is strictly narrative focused and driven, you have a better memory of the events that have happened in the story. You have a better sense of the, it feels like you spend more time with the characters in proportion to the greater story, right? So I think that's kind of maybe some of the issues that might lie with open world game narratives, is the fact that because of the way in which these games are designed, and most players, I think, are incentivized to do a lot of the other things outside of the main story. I could absolutely have, and this might have shaped my opinion on the game, or maybe shaped my opinion on the main narrative in a different way if I just completely ignored the rest of the side content and just fully focused on the main story. That might have shaped my opinion a little differently. I still think the stories are great, and I think they're really, I think they can be really engaging at times, but because of just how much stuff there is, I think it can dilute some of the other moments in the game. Like you could be doing a quest that had a similar, like you've kind of experienced this theme in a side content earlier, which might have actually told that story a little better than it did with the main story. You know what I mean? So you're like kind of repeating certain, certain beats, like certain story beats in the main story that you might have already experienced in some side plot or some side story or some quest that, that is, different from, the main quest. So I think that is where maybe some of the issues might lie with these types of games. But that could also just be a factor of the way in which I play these types of games, where I do, while I do prioritize main story in most instances, I still engage a plenty amount with the side content when I find it interesting enough to do so, right? So it's I don't, they're like, who can I really, there's not really anybody to fault necessarily. I just think that because of the way in which these games are designed and structured, some of the more important parts of the game might just not hit as hard because of all the other aspects of it, because there's so much to a game, you know what I mean? Like there's just like an abundance of things, which again is not a bad thing. It's just more like, I don't know, maybe it's just like a personal preference thing. So, but yeah, that isn't to say that Blood and Wine doesn't have a bad story. It doesn't. I think it has a pretty intriguing story. I think just the mystery element of it is just like not as strong to me, because it's kind of like, like once you find out about what is happening, it kind of, I think, and again, we'll see through to the rest of the story and how things kind of end up, because I really cannot judge this story until I fully complete it. But yeah, like I'm just like, how is this going to change the way in which a certain character is going to be maybe judged at the end of this campaign? How is it going to change Geralt's relationship with the more important characters in this campaign, right? There's certain dialogue options. If I chose this dialogue option, like how much more would that have changed the result of that? So these are things that I think are interesting to consider. But yeah, I mean, I'm it's easy to kind of it's easy to get just sort of strung along in so much other content in this game that it's like who are you really, who are you to really to blame, right? Like it's just like not really it's not a big issue. It's really not a big issue. I just think this is something that I have noticed when playing these games, where oftentimes it's really hard to have a focused story at times because I'm just repeating myself, but you understand what I mean. When there's not like a narrative, I think especially in the case of like of Breath of the Wild and like Tears of the Kingdom, I understand I understand Breath of the Wild. The story is often so separate from the world and at large, because you're essentially living in like a post-apocalyptic world, and it kind of the relaxing and chill vibes of what you do in the game feels very, can feel very separate from the actual story of the game, which is trying to save Zelda and everything like that. But I don't know, that might be a whole nother discussion, right? Anyways, that's just something that I've kind of noticed as I've just been thinking about, working my way through The Witcher 3. And then when I'm just doing all of these different side quests, just plowing through, monsters and thieves and that kind of thing. There's also the concept of like ludo narrative dissonance, wherein the way in which you play as the character of Geralt oftentimes might not be reflected as the actual Geralt that is supposed to be presented in the story. Now, in the case of The Witcher 3, you have a lot of decisions and stuff like that, so your actions do have consequences, but I do think it is really funny when Geralt is very like steadfast in his beliefs to not, there should not be like there shouldn't be unnecessary bloodshed. Yet in a lot of side quests, you're just like killing just like bands of roving bandits, and it's like, okay, are these like, sure, maybe some of them are bad, but like also, like, are they all bad? Like, it's just kind of like, and you're just like chopping off their heads and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's just kind of funny where you get that. And I understand, look, they do talk about and acknowledge that, Geralt's not, he's obviously not like a pure person. Absolutely not. He's made mistakes in his life, but I just think it's funny when, he kind of carries himself with like a certain code, at least based on just kind of, the base character of him. If you, even if you don't make decisions necessarily, if you follow him through like the main game, he does carry himself with certain principles. It's just funny in like the side content. You could do whatever. You could just kill everyone. Yeah, like not everyone, but you know what I mean. You could just be like a ruthless murderer in the side content, and it doesn't affect his character in the main story necessarily, right? And so there's like a little bit of that ludo narrative dissonance, as I said. And I think you could see that instance in a lot of other kind of games of this nature, where the actions that you take as a player oftentimes are not reflected in the character of the story. So I just think that's kind of interesting. So shifting things a little bit here, going back to some basketball stuff. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to talk about the Warriors yet, just because, again, waiting for things to happen. But for the NBA at large, there's going to be media day starting next week. I think training camp has already like technically started for a lot of teams. But media day starts next week for a good chunk of teams. Here's my kind of takeaway with media is just that there's not like actually a lot to take away from it. Now, earlier this week, the New Orleans Pelicans had their media day because they had it a little earlier. I'm not exactly sure why, but just for scheduling purposes or something like that. And then there was like the whole discussion about Zion losing weight and everything like that, and him looking healthier and him talking about being healthier and stuff like that. So there are like quotables that you can kind of take away from those events. But ultimately, just after a good chunk of years following the league, there's really not a lot you can take away from this day. Really, the main thing I feel is just that it truly signifies the beginning of the season in a way, where you see players in uniforms for the first time since the summer, and it's like, okay, like players are back. They might have been back for a while, but actually seeing the posted images and stuff like that, seeing new players in new jerseys and all that kind of thing, that is kind of where the excitement lies, less so in anything that anybody says, because nobody actually says anything at media day. They say a lot, but they say nothing at the same time. It's just what the takeaway is. Like, you could have the most inspirational sounding speech or quote from a coach, and then you find out that they get fired later, like halfway through the season. So it does not matter, right? It really doesn't matter. But it is just like a nice placeholder to signify that we are reaching the beginning of the regular season, right? We're going into October. It's really exciting. It's really good stuff. So I think that's kind of like where more of the excitement lies, is seeing like, it's just like, oh, this player is on this team now. I completely forgot about that. That's kind of where the fun is, right? And just like, the fact that there are going to be preseason games coming up too. So that's just like a good, it's just like a good sign of those things. But I do think it is kind of like, it's like, is anyone actually going to say anything of substance? Most likely not, right? But it is fun to kind of see if that does actually happen or not. So that's kind of where things lie with that. Next week is going to be fun. I think next week's going to be fun to kind of go through and just catch up on maybe potential like training camp stuff, how those rosters are going to look like with the Warriors. Like, oh my goodness, please figure that out. If there is still an issue, I really don't want to harp on it, but if there is still even this issue, like the full roster is not going to be finalized until this whole Kuminga thing clears up. And it's just such, I don't know. I don't even really want to talk about it anymore. But I hope that we get a good sense of who's going to be on the freaking team by next week. And I hope that this just clears out, because we need to move on. The season starts in a month. Like it's time. It's time to move on and make a decision. So yeah, that's kind of where things are. I was watching this video talking about. I've been kind of listening to a good chunk of like podcasts during work and stuff, listening to, just updated basketball coverage, and a lot of people are talking, to giving their predictions. I kind of did that listening to, I kind of did that earlier this week, talking about giving my thoughts on the Eastern and Western conferences and that kind of thing. One of the things that I think I might have forgotten to mention is the fact that there are going to be these like small little rule changes. One of the ones that I forgot that they changed was the one regarding the half-court heave, where I think it's like either make or miss, or I think if you miss that shot, it doesn't count towards your field goal or something like that, right? It's a that feels like a really, I don't know, because like the NBA is so heavily analytically driven. I mean, you could point that to most of the major sports are heavily analytically driven, but it's like if you don't shoot the shot at half court, you know you're more likely than not you're going to miss that shot. It's just like, and that might affect your field goal percentage or whatever. Can we not do that? Does that have to be such like a thing where, I don't know, where players are not are is that going to incentivize players to shoot more because it's not going to affect their field goal percentage? Like, it's just kind of silly. You know what I mean? Like, it's still a shot. A shot is a shot. You know what I mean? Does it really matter the fact that it's half court and beyond? I don't know. It's just kind of a ridiculous thing. It's just like one more thing to keep track of. How many things do you need to keep track of nowadays, right? I get like stats are important and stuff, but at a certain point it gets to a point where it just feels a little ridiculous, and it feels like you're kind of bogging things down too much to where you're, I don't know, because I don't know. I look, I understand, you know, front offices and teams look at numbers, absolutely. And so if they see if like a certain player's field goal percentage is down, maybe they were like a 40% 3-point shooter until they shot that shot. But it's like if that player's like still 39.5%, like, why does that? I don't know. It's just kind of, it feels a little silly in my opinion. And yeah, I think maybe there's some other rule changes as well, but that was like the one that kind of like stuck out to me as being like, I don't understand if this was really needed at all. Like, this just doesn't do anything really, but whatever. It's not that big of a deal. It's just kind of, it feels kind of silly in my opinion. Anyways, that's gonna do it for now. I'll catch back up later. I don't know, maybe tomorrow, maybe Monday. If I wrap up Blood and Wine, I'll talk about it. And yeah, maybe I'll talk about some, you know, media day stuff or something like that. If anything interesting comes out of that, or if there are any updates on the Warriors, I'll get into that. But yeah, that's gonna do it for now. And yeah, catch back up later in a couple days or something like that. All right, recording this on September 29th, 2025. It is a Monday afternoon / evening. Today was the media day for most of the NBA teams. There were a few teams that already had their media days last week. But today was kind of the big one for the rest of the league. Again, not really much that I can really add from what I already talked about this past weekend regarding just that it's, you know, it's signifying the start of the season, kind of hyping up the season, but it is mostly fluff. You know, there's not like a ton that you can really take away from you know, coach and player quotes and that kind of thing. Like, people are gonna talk. You know, maybe once in a while you get like just like an absolutely honest answer from somebody, but most of the time with these, you know, player availability or coach availability sessions, like, you're not really getting a whole lot, right? Like, it's mostly people just talking very glowingly about what to expect for the season, people being very positive and everything like that. So, yeah, that's just kind of how it usually is for media day. So there's not really a lot to talk about there. However, the Warriors have finally signed Al Horford, DeAnthony Melton, and Gary Payton II. which means that they do have, it seems like they do have a fully rounded out roster now. However, the the Kuminga situation is not yet, resolved yet. But we do have a good sense of what the team is now. And so, because of that, I feel that I can get a good sense of the season. So I think I'm going to do a season preview. Just kind of starting with, what we have and everything so far. I guess this will be, like with the Warriors and everything like that, I think there's always going to be maybe like shifting expectations and that kind of thing. I think last year, last year I was pretty adamant going into the season that I had no real expectations. Like, it was just such a up and down season. Started off incredibly hot. There's a lot of just like, oh my goodness, maybe this team has got it. And then they cratered and fell off the cliff, right? So, and then until they got Jimmy and things kind of solidified from that point on into the playoffs. They'll be a better team than they were at the beginning of last year, I believe. But I also am very cautiously optimistic for this season. I think they'll be good. They will be a good team because they have good players. They have good veterans. They're all veterans, right? We are the oldest team in the league right now. I don't even think that's really even comparable, right? The entire starting lineup is like 40-year-olds. But yeah, I think that they're going to be a good team. There's a lot of experience there. And I feel that it's going to serve them well at points in the season. The real issue is just the sustainability of the length of the season going into the playoffs, right? Like, how well are these older players' bodies going to hold up for an 82-game season plus playoffs? I do feel a lot more confident that they'll be going into the playoffs this year, or at least in contention for postseason. That I feel pretty good about, but it's just gonna be a matter of how well is everybody gonna hold up. I think that because this feels kind of last rodeo, last dance, whatever, right, this season. I've kind of said this repeatedly over the past, during the off season, that I think this year in conjunction with Jimmy Butler's contract, I think is really going to be the last possible kind of push that the Warriors can make in the Curry era. I felt pretty good about how things, of course, you don't want to see Steph go down during the postseason. But in terms of just what I wanted to see out of the season, the fact that we got one competitive series and one against the 2 seed and, looked competent for one game in the second round with Steph hobbled, I think is something. You know what I mean? I do think that when it comes down to it, they will be I don't think there's not going to be a team that wants to face the Warriors in the playoffs, right? That is for certain. It's just a matter of getting to that point is really the issue, is like how well can the players maintain themselves going into it? Because let's look at the starting lineup is going to be what? So you got Steph, Draymond, Jimmy, Horford, and most likely Podziemski. And then on the bench, you got Melton, GP2, Quentin Post. I'm assuming Guy Santos is going to be part of the rotation. I'm assuming that Will Richards, he seems like he's poised to be a part of the rotation. Moses Moody, maybe those two players might be kind of more interchangeable, but I think Moody is probably going to get the slot above him. I think there are still questions regarding rotation and depth and all that kind of stuff. I mean, this is an issue you can kind of put to most teams, right? Is that the second, third units of teams are going to be significantly worse in a lot of instances in comparison to the first unit. Because it's, most of the time it's going to be complementary as opposed to it being, a like a substitute, right? So that's, I think, maybe, that's something to kind of look at. They were able to, they had that incredibly hot start at the beginning of last season where, Kerr was running, 11, 12 deep rotations and, strength in numbers and all that stuff. And it was working out for a little while, but there are going to be times where there is just a, just the rate of return, or there's going to be diminishing returns as the season goes forth, because those players that you're kind of slotting into these important roles are not going to be able to, produce at a consistent basis. Like, they just are not going to be able to have these electrifying games, night in and night out, because that's not what is asked of them. We can't expect like every bench player to have this like, role superstar every game, because I think that's just unreasonable. And I don't think there should be that expectation placed on these players, right? So I think I feel pretty good about, some of the, like Melton. I think if he's able to play limited role, like limited minutes, because of how injury prone he has been over the past few seasons, like if he's limited to 10, 15 minutes, I think that would be huge. I think his position is incredibly important. What he was able to do last season was incredibly impactful. Like, we could see that. I thought he was the perfect, second, like shooting guard, wing position next to Curry, kind of playing in a similar type of role to what Clay used to, right? Being a good defender, being, secondary kind of scorer on that in that starting role. Like, I thought he was a perfect position. It's just the unfortunate fact that he's injury prone and his back issues just kind of flared up again. So obviously, if you're the Warriors, you want to kind of tread with caution with him. So just having him be, a really good support bench player while playing, meaningful moments during the game, playing relief moments for someone like Curry, because there were moments where he did have like ball handling responsibility, which I thought I thought he was pretty competent at it, just based on, eye test and that kind of thing. Obviously, it is hard to gauge, whether, how impactful he was, because he played, like such a limited time. But I do feel like the time he had was like good, I think. And I think that if that can somehow translate to this year, if he still has any semblance of the mobility that he showcased last year at the beginning of the season, I think that could be really, really helpful. I do think it's especially useful to have someone with a little bit of size to back up both, Steph and Podziemski. I completely forgot about Buddy Hield too. Buddy's going to be, he had some Game 7 Buddy, like he had some incredible moments in the postseason last year. So he'll be important in that kind of role as well. I think, the Buddy, Melton kind of, off the bench roles, I think will be pretty useful, right? Unless like Buddy starts in the two, I think they'll probably still have Pods as part of the starting rotation, because I think it feels like he's earned that trust from from Steve Kerr. So that feels kind of right in that sense, right? Do think for like shooting, having just a shooter, an additional shooter on the floor, having someone with Buddy's gravity, I think it can be useful as well. But I do understand why Pods, as being a secondary ball handler on the floor, with Steph being the floor spacer, I think has been what's worked in the second half of the season last year, and then going into the postseason. So that just might be the strat for now. But I do think having Buddy on the floor at the same time with Steph is very very useful as well. But there are some issues maybe with just like the defensive side of the ball there, right? Although Buddy did have he did really step up in defensively during the Rocket series, so he does have that capability. It's just like, I think in terms of reliability, it's like, maybe Pods isn't going to be the most like offensively focused player, but in terms of just kind of a well-rounded, someone who fits well into the Kerr system, like he's got all the traits and like the intangibles that I think Kerr has really liked. So just having him in that starting role probably makes the most sense in this kind of scheme that they got going on. So yeah, I think, yeah, so just like the longevity and just like the reliability of the players being able to stay on the floor is really the biggest concern, I think. And then along with that, I would say is bench rolls, as I would say, because like if any of I do think like if Steph goes out and the other players are like healthy, Jimmy can kind of slot in and be decent. But I mean, we did see when Steph did go out, the team did have some trouble in the second half of the season. Like I mean like kind of in the late part of the season. Like there were moments where it was just like he was just such a clear missing piece for them. And obviously in the Timberwolves series, right? So that will be a bit hard to replicate. I think in the regular season, it's probably going to be a bit easier to maybe slot that in, and maybe having some more help from the likes of Horford and that kind of thing, I do think will alleviate some of that. But it's just like they just need to make it through. I think that's what it kind of feels like. It's just like a test of endurance for this current version of the team. And so that's like number one. Number two, again, bench. And then I guess like point 2B is a competent backup role position. I do think Quentin Post, with an additional year, he made a surprise kind of leap sort of, or surprise introduction into the lineup kind of midway through the season, and he really having like a stretch five basically is huge. How well he does on the defensive end kind of remains to be seen, but I do think having him as kind of, I think having, someone like Horford as a mentor, I think is going to be huge. I think that's like a really great potential development piece for him. And I think that, just having someone who plays maybe in kind of a similar role to him, and also hopefully giving him and teaching him the best way to maneuver on the defensive end, I think is a great addition. Because they still got Trace Jackson Davis, but it's kind of like, break glass in only an emergency type of thing. It's like if they really need a big, he is available, but he has really fallen out of the rotation in the past season after kind of, after Quentin Post kind of started to sort of take up that bench role. I mean, you had Post starting some games in moments. So, just the backup big rotation has question marks, which has always been the concern over the last like 5 years or so, is the fact that we just do not have, and also Looney is no longer on the team as well. So we're just kind of like, after Horford, it's like, man, this is going to be a bit tough to kind of, put together. I don't know what that's going to look like. I do have faith that they'll figure something out. Like they'll just, if they really need to, they'll just play small ball five, like as they've done. But as the league continues to kind of reintegrate and reprioritize the center position, and larger teams kind of take advantage of that, I do think that is like a bit of a concern, because if you look at teams like the Rockets or the Thunder, who are running these like double big lineups, it's a bit hard to, it's going to be hard. I think there was a lot of cause for concern, especially in that Rocket series. I mean, when it went to Game 7, I was like, dude, I don't know, dude. Like, if they somehow blow this, like, this might be, this might spell trouble, right? And Game 7, Buddy happened, the experience all kind of worked out for them. But I do think that there were things in that series that worked well for the Rockets, and I'm sure they would want to try to replicate that along with other teams against the smaller Warriors. So that's always going to be something that's always going to be like an issue, I think, as long as Steve Kerr is the head coach of this team. So yeah, I would say like 3-ish points are kind of what I'm, most sort of a little, worried about, or just kind of, those are my 3 things that I'm, concerned about, I would say, going into this season. And I think the rest of it really is just, the Western Conference being kind of, bloodbath or whatever, all those kinds of things. That's going to be a theme, right? That is going to be a theme. That was a thing that affected at the literal last game of the season when the Warriors played the Clippers. And so I think that situation is only going to be avoidable if the Warriors are going to be able to kind of push themselves into a tier above those teams. But I just don't believe them to be there, right? I think they are on par with teams of, I don't even, maybe I think the Rockets maybe have a bit of an edge due to the youth and everything like that. But with Fred VanVleet out, I do think that kind of drops them down a little bit. So I think maybe they're like kind of on par with them. Memphis is still kind of in the mix, although they have a lot of question marks. The Timberwolves, I think, are going to be a better team than that. I would, you could probably throw the Lakers into the mix as well. So this kind of mixture, who knows, maybe the Spurs make a jump or the Blazers make a jump. Like there's just like this whole mixture, muddle of like 5-6 teams that are in the playoff mix, like outside of the Thunder and the Nuggets. You got everybody else. And so I think that's kind of where the Warriors end up if they're able to get into the top half of the playoff bracket. Again, it's so early to be even, projecting and talking about this, but that is kind of my want going into this season. Of course, I want the best for this team. I do think there are ways that they can do that and just be like the veteran team, like be the championship, all of the experience that their core players have, just giving them, and the Clippers too. I forgot about the Clippers in that mix. But just like the core kind of group of players having all of that playoff and championship experience, I think will aid in some way, shape, or form. And hopefully that kind of gets them above the rest of the pack in some ways. But it is going to be hard. It's going to be tough. You know what I mean? I think that if they can take advantage of just being that team when going against these younger, less experienced teams, I think they'll be in good position. I feel pretty confident that they can handily take care of a good number of the Eastern Conference teams, right? So it's too early to like just slot that in and be like, these are wins, because they lost a lot of games that they should have won last year. But again, it's a new year, it's a new season. I'm feeling a lot more optimistic this time around than I was last. So there's a lot to look forward to. I think the thing I'm most looking forward to with the Warriors season, other than the obvious of, being able to watch Steph play again and that kind of thing, is how well the second, third years are going to be able to translate their game and how well they're going to be able to, slot in. I mean, the other thing that I'm looking forward to is Kuminga not being on this team, but that's a whole nother thing, which I'll get into later once that whole situation is cleared up. But we saw some really great kind of jumps from Podziemski. I already talked about, Post. Moody's like in his fourth, fifth year, but I still kind of consider him to be in that group because of his age and everything. He had some really nice moments in the kind of the latter stretch of the season. So yeah, the younger players, like I do think there are going to be, there's going to be expectations like I kind of laid out. With how well the bench role is gonna, how well the bench is gonna be able to support the starters and everything, right? Is Will Richards gonna be like a solid contributor? Like, I think there was like a reason why they drafted him, because of he's like a bit of an older rookie and everything like that. That's kind of been the MO for the Warriors drafting ever since kind of the championship kind of years with Curry and stuff. So that kind of mold of player, of drafting like an older high IQ player that knows that their role and slots into it, is kind of what works incredibly well for this team. So if those younger players are able to play well to their roles, I think it's going to be exciting, right? Like it would be nice to kind of see some players pop off here and there. It would be nice to see, maybe some of the younger players make some, significant strides. I think it might be a lot to expect with this team and who they have, but it would be nice to be like, okay, maybe there is like more, maybe Post is able to actually be a more, he's able to kind of evoke a more traditional center, being like a rim runner, protector, that kind of thing, right? So that those are things that I'm looking forward to, along with just seeing like Steph play and just being excited for the season, because this is it. I really kind of believe that this is it. I don't know what it's going to look like next season. I don't think Jimmy's going to be here. Like, he's probably going to be trying to look for some other contract, or he might be just willing to hang it up. I have no idea what his intentions and what his goals are. Horford, like, how much longer is he going to play? Is he going to have that LeBron type longevity? 39 is really impressive, right? It's like him, Chris Paul, LeBron, that are all playing in, their 40s or near 40s. But that is like a pretty rare case, right? So I just cannot bank on him being this, like, you can't just bank on him being like this anchor going into next season. It's just like everybody's old, and this feels kind of, this is like the last kind of like hurrah from this group of players. Just like a combination of different kind of, players from teams that have all crossed paths, right? I think I've been seeing a lot of memes about, when Jimmy versus the Heat a couple of seasons ago, when they went to the finals, and there was like, Al Horford calling the timeout, and then Jimmy, throwing the timeout back at him, like that kind of fun stuff, right? I think that would be pretty kind of fun to see in action. And, just like the fact that there is just like this history amongst all of these players is going to be interesting. There's a lot of years between all of them. So that is going to be kind of interesting to see how that meshes together, and how well they can play together. Like, they just can outsmart players, I think, is really what I think you can really take away from this season, like in terms of like how are they gonna how are they gonna overpower teams. I don't think that's going to be the case, right? They're not going to win through just being the strongest team. They're going to win because they're of the experience. That's I'm kind of harping on that point, but I really do believe that's going to be what kind of carries them through. And so I think it's going to be like, oh yeah, this is like these players have so much under their belts. Like, you're just kind of showcasing them, how they communicate on the offensive side of the ball and how they communicate on the defensive side of the ball. We're going to see all of that, I think. And that is going to be exciting to watch. So I'm feeling, this is probably the most positive I've been about the Warriors, even after the Jimmy trade. Like, I was pretty scratching my head. I'm like, I don't know if they should have done this. And of course it worked out, and it led to led them past the first round. But really, outside of that, this feels like the most positive and kind of optimistic I feel for this season. I am not expecting the world of them, but I do want to see, just like one more kind of shot, right? I think, just last season was a good shot, but this season I think is an even better shot. So I'm hoping that they can kind of take advantage of that and really just be like, this is going to be it, like this is it for kind of all of us in a way. Like, I'm sure, some of the, like, Draymond could probably play for like a couple more years, but who knows? Like, is he really gonna, like, once Steph retires or whatever? I mean, he's still gonna have things in the tank, but who knows how well sort of constructed the rest of the team is going to look in a few years. And is he going to really want to play on those teams? Like, if they're not contending, I have no idea. So it's just kind of like, I think for everybody, it's like, this is kind of it. And that kind of lends itself to the excitement of this season. It's just like, maybe there's not like, maybe from their perspective, there's a lot on the line. From my eyes, it's like, why not go for one more? Why not go for one more with this old ass group of players? You know what I mean? It's like a fun kind of like, I don't know, there's like some type of, I don't know, feeling of it, where if they try to close this out, like, at least go out with a bang, you know what I mean? I really, of course there's going to be disappointments, like there's going to be some bad losses, there's going to be things that piss me off, when they get to the postseason, there's going to be some stuff. I don't expect them to, again, I don't expect like a ton. It's just going to be incredibly difficult with who they're going up against in the rest of the conference. So, but if they can just, put themselves in a position to be able to like succeed, I think is really what matters. And there's a lot to look forward to there. So, we'll see what the rest of this week looks like with the whole Kuminga situation. But I am happy that we finally have solidified those roster spots. And I think we're still waiting to see whether like Seth Curry signs. That might be a nice little addition as well. I don't know how much he has left in the tank himself. I think it's been a long time. It's been like 7-8 years or something like that since he's played on the Warriors, right? Like way back then. So I don't expect him to be that same type of player, but it would be cool to have him back on the team again, I think. So hopefully we're able to kind of get him. It would be nice to have like another, have the Curry brothers play together. That would be fun to see. That would be just like a nice little touch for this team and for this season. So yeah, that's that. Anyways, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks for listening as always. This has been Save the Semantics, signing off.